It is the anniversary of the attacks on Israel by Hamas militants that happened on October 7, 2023. Already so much has happened today, from memorial ceremonies to protests to attacks still on Lebanon and, of course, in Israel as well as in Gaza. On this day last year, over 1,200 people were killed in the attacks and almost 300 were taken captive by Hamas militants. Today, the Hamas Gaza Health Ministry says Israeli attacks on the Strip has killed nearly 42,000 people. But Israelis across the country today blared sirens. It took a minute to stand in silence at 6:29 a.m., marking the beginning of a Hamas-led attack on the Israeli border communities just a year ago. Some 1,200 people were killed, as we said, 250 others taken hostage. A year on, 101 hostages are still held captive by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Now in Jerusalem, families of hostages took to the streets near Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's private residence, where they carried photos of their loved ones and sounded the siren at 6:29, them standing in silence, as you see there at the site of the Nova Music Festival, where hundreds of partygoers and staff were killed by Palestinian militants and scores others taken hostage. Israeli President Isaac Herzog joined grieving families and friends marking the day. Mourners listened to the last track that was played at the rave party before it was stopped abruptly, just as it did a year ago at sunrise when those militants struck. Over in Tel Aviv, people stood still while others blew the shofar, a ram's horn used in Jewish religious ceremonies, to mark the anniversary of the most deadly attack in the history of Israel. And Israel's parliament, the Knesset, lowered its flags to half-mast today, marking the commemoration of the October 7 Hamas attack, the deadly assault in Israel's history. Flags were lowered by the Knesset's honor guard at 6:29 a.m., the time the rockets from Gaza started raining down on southern Israel, followed by a deadly rampage by thousands of Hamas-led militants on Israeli communities, army bases, and an outdoor music festival.
לנו יחזרו אלינו הביתה. הלוואי שהייתה לנו גם הנהגה ראויה.
People standing still as they remember the moments those Hamas militants struck in Israel, sirens blaring today, Israelis also carrying flags and images of hostages taken by Hamas. They all gathered outside the Prime Minister's home in Jerusalem. Security forces were on high alert across the country today. The military and police said that they were anticipating possible Palestinian attacks planned for this anniversary.
We can't believe it's a year. It's a year that just disappeared, vanished. We're still stuck in October 7th, 2023, in one non-ending day of terror, of fear, of anger, of despair.
We're standing right here in Jerusalem outside the Prime Minister's house because it's been a year since so many Israelis were taken, kidnapped by Hamas, and they're still there. My cousin Carmel was kidnapped on October 7th, and we learned just 1 month ago that she was murdered in captivity because the deal was supposed to save her did not come in time. We're here to say that if we don't act now and get all the hostages back right now, we might lose all of them, just like we lost her.
We came here this morning 365 days since October 7, 2023, because this is the place, the hostage square, the place to be and pray, to bring back all the 101 people that are still in hostage in Gaza, and also for those who died a year ago. We're mourning for a year, and being here is the best place to be together, to mourn together.
It's been a year, October 7th, since we were attacked by the Hamas in the south, and we're still in war with Hezbollah and Iran in the north. But we just want to make sure that in this year, that the final triumph is when our hostages, we have 101 hostages still in Gaza, and it seems like maybe the focus has been shifted a bit to the wars that we're fighting now with the Hezbollah and with Iran. And we're here for prayers and to make sure that the families should know, the government should know, the world should know that we are not giving up on our hostages, and we're here for prayers. Anybody that could listen, anybody that could hear us, if it's God or if it's the government, to make sure that the hostages will be back. That will be the final winning for Israel.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today visited the Jerusalem Iron Sword Monument on the anniversary of the October 7 attacks alongside the Mayor of Jerusalem, Moshe Leon. He said, addressing those who attended alongside him, he said, on this day, in this place, and in many places in our country, we remember our fallen, our hostages, that we are obliged to return. He made the statement, of course, before lighting a candle at the monument. Prime Minister Netanyahu later held a special cabinet meeting in Jerusalem to commemorate the 2023 attacks, where he said Israel was changing the security reality of the Middle East to ensure something like October 7 could never be repeated.
ביום הזה, במקום הזה, במקומות רבים.
Palestinians said that they yearn for a return to normalcy a year into the war in Gaza, which has turned wide areas of the enclave into wasteland. As residents of Khan Yunis went about their daily lives among the leveled houses and streets, one displaced man said that life in Gaza has become uninhabitable. According to him, Gaza has become an unfit place to live safely at the very least, due to the destruction of everything on the land, and everything, after everything in it was targeted, including stones, trees, children, men, women, and even agricultural lands and water wells. The war was triggered when Hamas militants attacked southern Israel on October 7 in a raid that killed over 1,000 people. Israel's subsequent assault on Gaza has killed nearly 42,000 Palestinians, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. It's also displaced nearly 2.3 million people in the enclave. The VOA's Linda Gradstein is in Jerusalem for us. Linda, great to have you on, especially on this somber day. And as expected, a somber morning, somber moods all over, as Israelis remember the attacks on this day. What is the message that has permeated most in most of the events today?
I think the message is, first of all, this idea that Israel has to make sure that something like this can't happen again. And basically sadness. You know, Israel's a very small country. The whole population is less than 10 million people. So everybody knows somebody who was either killed on October 7th or has died fighting since then or who was wounded. So it's very personal for a lot of people. And I think there's also a mood of a lack of certainty and a lack of confidence that the government and the army can keep them safe. And so that's sort of the basic trust between citizens and the government has been broken. And so I think it's mostly a mood of sadness and fear for the future and uncertainty.
Let's explore that a little bit. This lack of confidence that people seem to have in the government, and put that side by side the war that's currently going on in Gaza and also in Lebanon. Do they feel that there is a point to these wars?
Well, so I think there's a difference between the two. The fact that Gaza has gone on for so long and that there were several times that there could have been a ceasefire agreement, and either Israel or Hamas kind of backed out at the last minute. In addition, in Gaza, Israel is now having to start new operations in places where they already were, where that supposedly had been cleared of Hamas. And so, you know, Israel's stated goal was to get rid of Hamas, make sure that Hamas can never pose a military threat to Israel. And there was rocket fire today from Gaza, although the rocket fire in general from Gaza has diminished. So I think there is a sense that people want the war in Gaza to end. They're not sure really what the point is. I think the war in Lebanon with Hezbollah, first of all, it's much newer. Israel launched its ground incursion just, a week ago into South Lebanon. And I think there's a sense there that Israel has to do something. In other words, it's not possible that 68,000 people who were evacuated from their homes a year ago can't go back to their homes because it's not safe. So the fact also that Israel assassinated Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, that Israel was apparently behind these pagers that blew up and killed and wounded a lot of the Hezbollah leadership. So I think that war in Lebanon has a lot more support. Who knows what will happen if it drags on as long as the war in Gaza does.
So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was at the Iron Sword Monument today to also express his condolences and also remember those who died in the war, who died in the attacks. Over 1,000 people in Israel were killed on that day. 250 taken hostage. There's still 101 still in captivity, but more than 40,000 people have died in Gaza. What did the Prime Minister say that people may have drawn some comfort from?
Well, he said that Israel is fighting on 7 fronts at the same time, Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, which fired also at Israel today. There are, attacks from Iraq. But he said that Israel is trying to has an opportunity to remake the Middle East, to make a situation where in the future this can never happen again, that there will be a strategic change in the Middle East. And he said that Israel has, suffered other attacks in the past, and that Israel as a country and Israelis are resilient, and they will continue to survive this attack and even to thrive afterwards.
Well, they can draw some comfort from those, and it's one of the most difficult days for those who lost loved ones. And as you said earlier, Israel is such a small country, a small population, so everyone tends to know someone, even you know someone who was also killed on that day. And our condolences to you and to all who are mourning today. It's a difficult day for them. And then there's also the other set of people who still have loved ones in captivity. How are both sides expressing, their feelings today?
Well, I think the families of the hostages are growing increasingly angry and increasingly desperate. as attention has shifted now to Israel's fight against Hezbollah in the north, the fighting in Gaza and the hostages have, become almost kind of a side issue. There have been intelligence reports that the situation that those who are alive are being held in has gotten much worse lately. There's no list. Nobody even knows who's alive and who was killed. In fact, just today there was one young man who was believed to be a hostage, and they announced that based on intelligence and other things they had received, that he was actually killed on October 7th, and his body was taken into Gaza. So that's another hostage who, they thought was alive and wasn't. So for the families, it's absolutely torturous. And, the basic sort of covenant between a citizen and his or her government is that the government will be there to help them when times get rough. And many of the families of hostages believe that this government has not done nearly enough, that Israel could have signed a ceasefire deal that would have led to the release of all of the hostages, including those 6 who, you mentioned, one of whom I know, Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who was killed just days before the army got to them, and, who was set to be released and who could have been released had there been a ceasefire deal. And I think about his parents, my friends Rachel and John. Every day must be just terrible for them, knowing that had there been a deal, their son today would be at home rather than dead. And for those who don't know if their loved ones are alive or dead, it's just absolutely terrible. And at least 4 of them who are still alive are American citizens as well as Israeli. There's a couple of British citizens, Thai citizens. So, the problem is that there doesn't seem to be any negotiations going on right now towards a ceasefire deal. I mean, it's not even, apparently Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar has not been in contact with anyone for several weeks. So then the question becomes, who is there to sign a deal with if he's not available?
So many questions surrounding this. And then Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, will be celebrated in a few days, October 12th, I think. It's also around, this period that the Arab-Israeli war was fought. How is the Prime Minister leading people through this somber season?
Well, he is trying to present a strong image, saying that Israel is winning in both against Hamas and against Hezbollah, that Israel is striking, blows that will eventually enable Israelis to be safe. At the same time, the army is calling out more reservists. I mean, it feels very much like it was October 7th a year ago when 300,000 reservists were called up. In Israel, everyone, both men and women, serve in the army, and people do reserve duty into their 30s, 40s, even 50 sometimes. But it means that all of these reservists are leaving their families, leaving their jobs. The Israeli economy is suffering from the year of the war. So he is trying to sort of present a strong front and to tell Israelis that, they have to try to work together and cooperate. But it's definitely a very difficult time for them.
It's difficult for many of us watching from afar, and the U.S. Is Israel's closest ally. It's drawn attention to the casualties of the war, the people who've died in Gaza. They have, a separate anniversary to remember, from this, and their anger towards Israel remains. Are Israelis sparing any thought for them at all today?
Well, some are, but I think the majority of Israelis are so caught up in their own pain that it's hard for them to see the pain of the other. At the same time, what they say is that Hamas has used the civilian population in Gaza as human shields. Hamas has hidden weapons in children's bedrooms, has, a huge tunnel network that goes underneath civilian houses. And they say that had the population risen up against Hamas, or had, people turned in, who knew where the hostages were. In some cases, hostages were held in people's homes. And so I don't think there is very much sympathy among Israelis for the people killed in Gaza. I mean, Israel says that it is trying to avoid civilian casualties. It's almost impossible in such a densely populated area. And of the 42,000, almost 42,000 who were killed, Israel says about 17,000 of them were Hamas gunmen. But that means that you've still got more than 20,000 civilians who were killed. I mean, the number is really kind of staggering. But I think that for Israelis right now, their pain is so all-encompassing that they're really not able to hold the pain of the Palestinians at the same time.
Understandably so. Linda, thank you again for speaking with us. We know must have been also a difficult day for you and for all of the Israelis who are mourning today, for everyone who is mourning today, including those on the side of Gaza who are also mourning their dead. Our condolences to them as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our coverage continues of the one-year anniversary of the Hamas attacks on Israel. We're now hearing from U.S. President Joe Biden, who says far too many civilians have suffered during this year of conflict. 1 year on since the attacks. In a statement released by the White House, it speaks of the unspeakable brutality and the beauty of the lives that were stolen on that day. Repeating a message he gave to Israel 1 year ago, President Biden says, "You are not alone. Today and every day, I think of the hostages and their families." He also condemned the vicious surge in anti-Semitism in America and says it will not stop working to achieve a ceasefire deal in Gaza that brings the hostages home. He says a diplomatic solution in Lebanon is the only path to lasting peace. President Biden ends his statement by saying that history will also remember October 7 as a dark day for the Palestinian people. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, has visited the Syria-Lebanon border where he said the International Aid Organization will launch a funding appeal to help respond to the displaced crisis caused by conflict between Hezbollah and Israel in Lebanon. He says the appeal was to, in his words, give us the necessary funds to address the situation now and in the next few months. Speaking in Jaidat Yabus, where Syrians who were living in Lebanon and returned to Syria due to ongoing hostilities between Hezbollah and Israeli forces were waiting at the doors of the Ministry of Interior, Immigration and Passports Department. Mr. Grandi, who traveled to Damascus from Beirut, said during the border visit that the repeated Israeli strikes on the main border with Lebanon had caused a reduction in the flow of people displaced by the conflict coming in.
Tonight, in Damascus, I will launch a funding appeal for donors to help us respond to the situation and to give us the necessary funds to address the situation now and in the next few months. After that airstrike that interrupted the flow, it's more difficult for people to cross, but there has been an organization to facilitate, thanks to the Red Crescent, for people to continue also by bus, and their volunteers are helping people transport their goods across the border.
And happening in Gaza, 10 people have been killed, dozens more injured in an Israeli airstrike on the Jabalia refugee camp, according to the Hamas-affiliated Safa news agency. It comes hours after the Israeli Defense Forces warned residents in parts of northern Gaza, including Jabalia, to evacuate the region. IDF spokesperson Avichai Adrei said at the time the Israeli military was operating with great force in areas including Beit Hanun, Jabalia and Beit Lahia. More now from the Israeli military, which also says Hezbollah has fired as many as 135 rockets across the border from Lebanon since this morning. Since October 8, 2023, there's been near daily cross-border fire between Israel and Hezbollah the day after the unprecedented attack on Israel by Hamas gunmen, which triggered the war in Gaza. Hezbollah says it began the campaign in solidarity with the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and maintains it will not stop until there is a ceasefire in Gaza. Meanwhile, the barrage of rockets fired from Lebanon was partly intercepted in northern Israel today, leaving damage to some houses and causing fire in an open area. Remains of projectiles were inspected and removed by a bomb disposal unit from the garden of a house in the town of Mahlot Tashiha. Hezbollah continued to fire missiles and rockets in northern Israel on the day the country marked a year since the October 7 Hamas attacks on southern Israel that sparked the year-long war in Gaza. Israel has escalated its offensive against Hezbollah figures and targets in Lebanon in recent weeks, it says, in order to get tens of thousands of its evacuated citizens back to their homes in northern Israel. Israeli airstrikes have displaced 1.2 million people in Lebanon, and as the bombing campaign intensifies, many are afraid that their country will face the vast scale of destruction wrought on by the Israel air and ground assault. Jordan's Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi has warned of an escalating regional conflict. He was saying this during his visit to Beirut, where he met with Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati. According to him, we're facing a catastrophe. We're facing a dangerous escalation that threatens the security of the entire region and threatens regional and international security and peace. Safadi said that Jordan was prepared to provide all the possible assistance to Lebanon to address the consequences of this brutal aggression, which constitutes a clear violation of international law. Today still remains the first anniversary of the October 7 Gaza war, which has given rise to the multi-front conflict across the Middle East as Israel sharply escalates its campaign against the Iranian-backed militant movement, Hezbollah, in Lebanon. And a residential building in Israel's Holon sustained broken windows today after Hamas armed wing said it attacked nearby Tel Aviv with a missile salvo. Israeli Army Home Front Commander Shimi Amar said that there was light damage and no casualties in the area following the report of the rocket launch from Gaza. Emergency services, the police, and a digger were on the site. The attack came today, the first anniversary of the Hamas attack on Israel. Looking at the scene of a Palestinian teen who was killed, 8 others wounded during an Israeli raid on the Kalandia camp in the West Bank, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. It also reported a 12-year-old was shot in the abdomen. 7 other citizens, including 3 children, were injured by live bullets and 20 citizens were arrested. The Red Crescent Society says its crews in Ramallah and Al-Bireh dealt with 8 injuries of live bullets and an injury from a rubber-coated metal bullet to the head. Israeli security forces are on high alert across the country today. Military forces are anticipating possible Palestinian attacks planned for the anniversary of the October 7 attacks. I want to bring in now humanitarian and international affairs analyst Dr. Charles Chukwunaru. He's in Calgary, Canada. Thank you for joining us on this day.
Thank you, Amarachi. It was a pleasure.
What has been going through your mind, as you have seen pictures and videos of Israelis either remembering what happened today 1 year ago, and then seeing these attacks that are happening still in Lebanon, the attacks in Gaza, and the number of the dead just going up?
Well, it's unimaginable to you can't imagine what is going on in the minds of the family members of the hostages. We must not lose sight that there are hostages still in captivity in Gaza. And it's also imaginable thinking about the plight of innocent civilians in both Gaza, northern and southern Israel. We must not forget that families have been displaced in both Israel and Gaza. Over 100,000 in Israel alone. When you put the figure that's been displaced in northern Israel and the number that have been displaced in southern Israel. And then when you go across to Gaza, they run into about 2 million innocent victims displaced. And then when you go across to southern Lebanon, about 2 million civilians also displaced. So it's worrisome, and it's not, there's nothing to show that the situation is improving. Rather, it is worsening. So it's sad, Marachi.
It is sad. I agree with you on that. It is sad. And what is even more sad is the fact that, there is no end date for Israel's offensive in Gaza and in Lebanon. According to the Prime Minister, they'll continue until Hamas and Hezbollah cannot attack Israel. How long do you think that will take?
Well, it's also fair to say that there is no end date to the attack by Iranian terrorist proxies in the Middle East against Israel. Just as you can say that there is no end date to the IDF attacks, basically to defend itself. So as long as the terrorist regime in Tehran is allowed by peace actors in the world to continue to sponsor terrorist attacks, to continue to launch attacks against the state of Israel from its terrorist proxies in Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. And of course, from Iran itself, there is no end in sight.
Let's talk about the refugees who are on the ground, especially on the part of Gaza. And now in Lebanon, people had to flee the southern part, ended up in the capital, many of them in open spaces. They have no idea, where their next meal will be coming from, especially even those in Gaza. We've heard attacks by Israeli forces on refugee camps in Gaza. I mean, that is just, the Israeli government explains that away by saying that, the refugee camps were not the target of the attacks. Unfortunately, you do have casualties in those areas. And then you still have people who have no idea when exactly they're ever going to have, their homes back. For someone like you who's done, humanitarian work, you've been on the ground, you have served in some of these missions. I'll call them missions because that sort of feels like what it is. What is it that, one can expect to see when you go to any of these refugee camps? What is the reality on the ground? Could you help paint a picture for us?
Okay, so I'm here in my capacity talking to you as a humanitarian actor who have seen some of these things in real life. I'm also here in my capacity as a professor of international relations and conflict management. So I I will explain what is on ground, and I also look at international relations so that we understand what is going on. So before I go into the humanitarian, wear my humanitarian cap, let me explain the international relations aspect. There is no morality in international relations. Nations involved in international relations pay lip service to morality, and international law is a farce in international relations because rich and powerful nations violate the provisions of international law with impunity. And this is because the war system is in a state of anarchy. That is why you always have wars. You always have refugees. There is absence of a world superordinate authority to enforce law and order and to enforce the rulings or the provisions of international law. And any law that lacks the power of sanction is not what the paper it is written on. The international system is characterized by self-help. Any country that is coming to help you is doing it in furtherance of its own national interest. And nations are involved in international relations to further, as against sacrifice its own national interest, which is most often than not selfish. So if we understand that, we will now begin to understand what is happening between Israel and its neighbors. The delusional regime in Iran is trying to project power and influence in the Middle East, claiming that it has a celestial authority from the Almighty God to impose a certain way of life, a certain way of government on the people of the Middle East. That is madness. Who were there with you when God gave you the authority to form a theocratic state in the region?
Could we talk about
it has
the
caused
refugees?
problem. Okay, all right, sorry. So let's go back to the humanitarian because I know we don't have time. So now what is going on right now is that there is a problem right now that has to stop. If you go to these refugee camps or these settlements, you discover that there is the dignity of the human person is seriously jeopardized. When you begin to consider the sanitary condition of the people, especially the women, against the backdrop of lack of water and sanitary materials for these women and children. I'm not even talking about housing. If you go to these camps, you can see that even the toilets and washrooms becomes a luxury. I don't even want to talk about food and medicine. And you're talking about thousands, and then you're talking about hundreds of thousands, and you're talking about millions, both in Gaza and in Lebanon. People are suffering. Whereas the world is keeping quiet.
Right.
And people are sitting in their state capitals, and they are doing politics with people's life. People's life are not going to be the same again. Families have been displaced. People will never be connected with their loved ones anymore. People will never go back to their ancestral homes anymore. A lot of children have been orphaned.
Indeed, Dr. Charles
A lot of
Chukwunoro.
children.
I do apologize. We don't seem to have a lot of time for this conversation. Again, I mean, the plight of the refugees in Gaza as well as in Lebanon, something to be discussed, continually discussed. Thank you again for speaking with us on the program.
Thank you very much, Amarachi. I hope that next time we'll have more time to explore these issues, because a lot of people don't even understand what is going on. Iran must be stopped from causing problems all over the Middle East. There must be peace in the Persian Gulf. There must be peace in the Mediterranean. There must be peace in the Red Sea. There
Dr.
must
Charles,
be peace in
we
Jerusalem.
really have to go
there must
now.
be peace in the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charles. Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts and your analysis on the program.
Thank you very much.
U.S. scientist Gary Ruvkun, who was announced as a joint winner of the Nobel Prize in Medicine, says he was not expecting to win, but that doing so was a lovely thing. Ruvkun, a professor at Harvard Medical School, shared the honors with Victor Ambrose of the University of Massachusetts Medical School for the discovery of meconium and its crucial role in how multicellular organisms grow and live. The Nobel Assembly, the award-giving body, said in a statement, the laureates discovered a new class of tiny RNA molecules which play a crucial role in gene regulation.
You sort of know that you're on the list, but you're on the list for 20 years, and at a certain point, it hasn't happened, so there's a chance it won't happen. Because there's many great scientists, and so you might not be chosen, and so you never know. And so was I expecting it this year? No. But it's a lovely thing. And then what I said was that, oh, this changes everything, because it does. The Nobel is just way different than all the other awards in terms of, cameramen don't show up for the other prizes. Let's put it that way, right? Not a bit, nothing. So that's different, and that's the 100 years of history.
Welcome back to The World Today. A British doctor has pleaded guilty to an audacious but unsuccessful plot to kill his mother's partner with a fake COVID-19 vaccine, which involved him forging medical documents and dressing in disguise to inject his victim with poison. 53-year-old Thomas Kwan passed himself off as a nurse and even took his own mother's blood pressure before administering poison to her partner, Patrick O'Hara, in Newcastle, northern England. O'Hara survived, but suffered from necrotizing fasciitis, a potentially fatal flesh-eating bacterial infection after receiving the jab. Kwan, a family doctor in Sunderland, pleaded guilty to attempted murder shortly after his trial began at Newcastle Crown Court last week. The Democratic Republic of Congo has expanded its Mpox vaccination campaign in North Kivu to focus on regional health workers as authorities seek to curb the virus's spread in the region. The initiative, which had been rescheduled multiple times, saw only 10 health ministry officials receive vaccinations during the campaign's official launch on Saturday. Mpox, formerly known as monkeypox, has been spreading in Congo's eastern regions, including Nyiragongo, straining the area's healthcare infrastructure. While health workers are being prioritized due to their high risk of exposure, it remains unclear when vaccinations will begin for the general public. Celebrations filled the streets of Tunis on Sunday as supporters of President Kais Saied jubilated after exit polls indicated his victory in the presidential election. Tunisians voted on Sunday in an election in which the president is seeking a second term. The election puts President Saied against two rivals, his former ally turned critic, Sha'ab party leader Zuhair Mazoui, and Ayachi Zamei, who was jailed last month. According to the Election Commission, turnout stood at 27.7%, and exit polls show Mrs. Saied in the lead with 89.2% of votes. Staying in Africa, attendees at the 5th Nigerian Community Excellence Awards in Africa emphasized the importance of unity among African nations. The event, held over the weekend, celebrates the achievements of the community. Organizers describe it as more than just an award ceremony. They see it as a beacon of hope amid challenging times. Our South Africa correspondent, Innocent Samosa, has more.
It was a night filled with glitz and glamour and plenty of dancing. During the event, speakers highlighted the pressing need for unity among African nations. The chairman of the Nigerian Community Excellence Awards South Africa, Olaniyi Obodedele, described this ceremony as more than just a celebration.
Of course, definitely, and it's one of the reasons why we started the award initially, because to us, social cohesion is very important. Citizens to citizens relationship also very important. And we wanted a platform where we can bring our best foot forward as Nigerians, show our best, and also show South Africans and Africans that indeed they are wonderful Nigerians there in South Africa, and also they are wonderful South Africans that are partnering with Nigeria. So this award, in essence, encompasses everything, the unity of Nigeria, South Africa, and Africa as a whole.
The gathering also honored individual accomplishments. I had the opportunity to speak to some of them, and here's what they had to say.
Oh my God, it means so much. It means so much. I look at it as if God made me win one for home first before I go out into the world. So this is definitely just the beginning, and I'm so humble and I'm so grateful for it. Yeah.
It means a lot for me because I know that I've been working harder, and I know that I'm doing good in my music stuff. So this award really means a lot for me, and I know it's gonna boost me more.
Being an African, and one leg in South Africa, one leg is in Nigeria, has taught me how to work together with both South African and Nigerian to make them as one. For me to be able to be where I am today, I will not leave South Africa from the book.
Channels Television correspondent Innocent Samosa was also honored for social appreciation category within the Nigerian community. Indeed, there was a sense of solidarity among Africans, setting a reminder that together we can overcome adversity. From Pretoria, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
Congratulations to our very own Innocent Samosa. In other news, Florida is preparing for its largest evacuation since 2017 as Hurricane Milton intensifies in the Gulf of Mexico on its path towards the U.S. state's western coast, coming on the heels of the devastating Hurricane Helene. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said additional resources have been allocated to remove debris from Hurricane Helene that pose additional danger now that Hurricane Milton moves near the western Florida coast. North Carolina, Florida, and much of the South are still recovering from the massive destruction caused by Helene, which killed more than 200 people across 6 states, making it the deadliest named storm to hit the mainland U.S. since Hurricane Katrina killed 1,400 people in 2005. Meanwhile, people in the Bosnian village of Butorovic, Polje, surveyed the damage from recent deadly flooding as emergency services continue a rescue operation there for 4 people still unaccounted for after the disaster. Local officials say at least 19 people have died in the floods across 2 Bosnian cantons in the center and south of the country. The floods follow an unprecedented summer drought, which caused many rivers and lakes to dry up and affected agriculture and the supply of water to urban areas throughout the Balkans and much of Europe. And as we end the program today, the flat of the future is probably not the one you'd expect. No cutting-edge technology, no robots, and no artificial intelligence. It is just a 26-square-meter apartment near Paris, aiming to drastically cut carbon emissions and water consumption with low-tech devices, allowing for a sustainable and nearly self-reliant life. French interior designer Caroline Poltz and engineer Corentin de Chateauperron moved into their urban biosphere this summer to lead a lifestyle that cuts out waste and divides water use by tenfold in order to meet the United Nations 2050 target for greenhouse gas emissions. Now, part of the experiment to evaluate low-tech living, the small studio situated in the close suburb of Paris in Boulogne-Billancourt is peppered with features that were designed to be simple, cheap, accessible to anyone, and easy to repair. In the kitchen, for instance, there is no gas stove. Rather, there is a resistance under a well-insulated pot powered by solar panels installed on the roof in order to slow cook the food. Now, in the bathroom, the large shower only uses a sprinkler to wash. Both says it is as comfortable as a traditional shower, but only uses a fraction of the water. The water is sent back to the aquaponics to feed the plants. This experiment started in July and is due to end at the start of November. Pretty interesting things happen in the world. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.